This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Josh Ritter, Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief, discussing their Direct Farm Operating Loan Program, as well as the Youth Loan Program. Romulo Lollato, K-State Wheat Production Specialist, continues the show with how the hard winter wheat tour has started. He explains what concerns and expected yields they are seeing for this year's crop. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, Brian Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster round out today's show on a segment of the Cattle Chat podcast as they converse about different methods for hoping to keep bulls safe when they are introduced together. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking with the Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief Josh Ritter as he talks about one of FSA's loan programs. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Josh, what FSA loan program would you like to talk to us about today?
We've talked about this before, but I want to talk about our farm loan operating program, again, our direct farm operating loan program. Talking about this loan, the funds under this program are provided directly to the producer by FSA, and the loans are then made and serviced by FSA. And the funds available under this operating loan program are used primarily to finance farm operating expenses.
As we're thinking about financing farm operating expenses, what does that include?
Yeah, there's a variety of different purposes that it can include. One of the primary purposes is to purchase machinery, equipment, and livestock that are necessary for the farm operation. The program can also be used to finance annual farm operating expenses, which would include feed, seed, fertilizer, pesticides, farm supplies, and cash rent payments. These funds can also be used for costs associated with reorganizing a farm to improve profitability. Quick example of that would be to purchase equipment needed to convert from conventional to no-till production. Also, the program can be used to refinance non-real estate farm-related debts. There are several different ways the producers can take advantage of FSA's operating loan program to help expand their operation and improve profitability.
And how is this loan different than just a normal loan they could get from a bank?
It's similar in the sense that they're going to be used for a lot of the same purposes. We don't compete directly with banks, so they'll be coming into our office if the bank kind of tells them they might need our help or need to go a different direction. But primarily, it'll be a lot of the same. We'll give them the money, they'll pay us back. The thing that's nice about our program compared to different bank loans is we offer a longer repayment ability for some of these loans. So typically, maybe if you're looking at commercial lending, you purchase machinery, it'll be like a 5-year note. We can go up to 7 years. So that's one of the differences. We also have a little lower interest rate than what you'll see at a commercial lender right now. Our interest rate for this program is 5.25%. So,
and Josh, can you tell us a little bit more about some of those numbers that are important for this program? Yeah,
I guess, kind of circling back to some of that, I want to point out the maximum loan amount available under the Direct Farm Operating Loan Program is $400,000. So that's a cumulative total. So just for an example, if a producer has an outstanding $200,000 operating loan, they could apply for another direct operating loan for up to an additional $200,000. Generally, I talked about the 7-year repayment term for maybe machinery, equipment, and those kind of purposes. Our annual operating loans are generally repaid within a 12-month period or when those commodities are sold. I guess another difference between our program and maybe a commercial program is we do straight annual operating loans. We don't have a revolving line of credit. So those are just straight 12-year notes, and for their operating expenses, and then they'll be paying us off, and they'll have to reapply again at the end of that year or at the end of that loan to get financing for the next operating term if they need it. Talked about the interest rate real quick. One thing I wanted to mention with that interest rate is once the loan is closed, the interest rate is fixed for the life of the loan. So if we locked in today with an approval at 5.25%, that'll be the interest rate for that full 7-year term.
And as we continue to think about this and talk about different things around this direct farm operating loan program, what are some eligibility requirements?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I would recommend producers they're going to have to work through those with their local FLP office, but a couple general thoughts to keep in mind are first, if the producer can obtain sufficient credit elsewhere at reasonable rates and terms, then they're not eligible for a direct loan through FSA, which we touched on briefly before. Also, direct operating loans require applicants to have sufficient education, training, or at least 1 year's experience in managing or operating a farm or ranch within the last 5 years. To meet the requirement through education, the applicant needs to have completed an educational program in agriculture. That can include either a 2 or 4 year degree from a college, with that degree being in ag business, horticulture, animal science, agronomy, or any other ag-related field. To meet that requirement through farm experience, the applicant needs to have been the owner, manager, or operator of a farm business for at least one entire production cycle. Generally, they can show that through production records or income and expense records like a Schedule F from their tax return.
And a lot of times these programs used by people who are more experienced, like you mentioned, but is there a program for someone who's maybe a little bit younger?
Yeah, we have a couple different ones, but really kind of when we're looking at our really younger subset, we do have a youth loan program available, and that's available to kids and young adults between the ages of 10 and 20 years old. So the maximum loan amount for that program is $5,000, and the interest rate is going to match what the regular operating loan interest rate is, which is currently 5.25%. For that youth loan, the applicant needs to have a project that must provide an opportunity for that person to acquire experience in education and in ag-related skills, and the project must be sponsored by an advisor such as a 4-H club, FFA, a tribal youth organization, or some similar agriculture-affiliated group. I think the program offers a great avenue for kids in our younger generation to become familiar with the loan-making process and get experience with financial management with the help of an advisor. A lot of the time, the program is used to fund either like a fair project, and that gives the opportunity for some kids to buy a steer, heifer, or pig that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to do so. I think it's just a really kind of can be a fun program for everybody involved and help lay that groundwork for kids to get used to coming in and kind of what that loan experience will look like for them. The other interesting thing about the program is if we have a plan that shows feasibility, basically that shows that loan can be paid by the profits coming in from the project, then there's no cosigner on that loan. So that kid will sign the note himself, and that's all we would need for that project. So,
Josh, if you would like to find out more information about these loan programs or other FSA loan programs, how can they do that?
First, I think it's important that if anybody's interested in those farm loan programs, to contact their local farm loan office and speak with one of our farm loan employees directly. We do have 21 farm loan offices in Kansas. If you're not sure where that office is located, I would recommend you go just to your local FSA office in your community, and they can give you that information and give you a contact. Additionally, if we're getting more used to finding things online, I think, and going that route. So there's more information available on www.farmers.gov regarding our loan programs that are available through FSA. That website also has a loan assistance tool that explains our loan options to the users and also provides some guidance on how eligibility is determined for those loan programs. In order to directly access the farm loan tools available through Farmers.gov, you could go to Farmers.gov and then /loans.
Josh, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me on.
That was Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief Josh Ritter. If you'd like to find out more information from the Farm Service Agency, as always, you can go to Farmers.gov. If you're looking to directly access the farm loan tools available through Farmers.gov, you can go to Farmers.gov/loans. Again, that is Farmers.gov/loans. I will link that information in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss USDA's inaugural look at conditions for our nation's pasture and rangelands that indicate a trend not seen in several years.
The first USDA National Pasture and Rangeland Condition Report for this growing season indicates mostly good news to start the year.
Good to excellent ratings nationally coming in at 46%. That is a 13 percentage point improvement from the same time a year ago. In other words, this time a year ago, we were at just 33% good to excellent. Meanwhile, very poor to poor ratings nationally, 25%. That is down from a year ago when we sat sat at 37%, very poor to poor.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey notes the significance of this first pasture and rangeland condition report of this growing season.
This is our best start to the growing season in terms of pasture and rangeland conditions since the spring of 2020.
Yet, there is a caveat to this bit of data.
We did have higher conditions to start the year each year from 2015 to 2020. So we've had kind of a low bar set in 2021, 2022, and 2023. We've recovered almost to the point of what we saw back in the mid to late 2010s.
This is reflected in state pasture and rangeland condition ratings to start May, featuring notable good to excellent ratings within regions.
In the West, California actually leads 95% of the rangeland and pastures rated good to excellent. We have a couple of states at 70% on the Great Plains. That is Nebraska and South Dakota. Those numbers at or above 70% extend into the lower Midwest and include states like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. Several states in the Southeast.
Despite the vast coverage of good to excellent pasture and rangeland conditions, there are some areas of concern as of the start of the month.
New Mexico and the southern Great Plains still showing some drought impacts that some of those go back quite a ways. Some are more short term. In Florida, where we're still in the midst of the dry season, it has been unusually dry. So we are starting off the year there. 41% of the pastures rated very poor to poor.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato as he gives us an update on how the Kansas Wheat Quality Tours are doing. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show talking with K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato on the Hard Winter Wheat Tour. Romulo, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby, for having me on the air today.
Romulo, what is the Hard Winter Wheat Tour?
So the Hard Winter Wheat Tour is actually an event where many people involved in the wheat industry to some extent gather to go out and check wheat fields around Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, try and come up with the size of the crop, right? And maybe some thoughts on also what the quality of that crop is going to be. And what's interesting also about this tour is that, as I mentioned, it's people from very, very differing backgrounds, right? So you may have here people from K-State like myself, a few growers participate in the tour as well, and they really enrich the experience too just by sharing what they're seeing. We may have bankers, we may have traders, we may have people in the milling industry, people in the baking industry. So it's a very, very diverse group that somehow everybody is related to wheat, right? We may have even Dunkin' Donuts traders participating on the tour, but they might not have seen a wheat field in their life before, right? And so many of these folks are the first time that they're visiting a wheat field, but they do work with wheat to some extent. And so they're interested in learning more. It's a very good educational opportunity for us to, get the word out about wheat grown in Kansas and in the southern plains here, and also a little bit of the culture, right? We do stop on many, many wheat fields, but we also stop at some cultural things that we might find along the way. So it's a very good exchange of knowledge and exchange of just having more context of people in the wheat industry.
Romulo, as you are making your way around the state with a group of people, where have you been and what are you seeing?
Yeah, so this wheat quality tour, it has 6 different routes, right? The northernmost, in the first day, yesterday, we left from Manhattan and we went all the way to Colby, right? And the northernmost route, they go all the way into Nebraska. Then the second route goes bordering Nebraska on Kansas, so just go across Highway 36, and that's the route that I was at yesterday. Then we have a route that pretty much goes through Highway 24, another one that goes through 18, then Highway 4, and Highway 56, right? So from way up north in Nebraska all the way down to 56 to central Kansas. In my particular route, right, in the north part of the state where we left Manhattan, went through Clay County, Washington, and then all the way west until Raleigh County and south to Colby. I think that a few of the talking points that I was seeing across the entire day was, number one, wheat streak mosaic virus. Every single field that we stopped in, we did 15 stops, every single field that we stopped in had some level of wheat streak mosaic virus. Some of them were fairly constant. It seems like more like a spring infection, so I don't think that it's as problematic in reducing our yields as a fall infection, where it really stunts the crop, but it was consistent. That region around Bellevue and Republic County was probably where we saw the most. So again, throughout the entire Highway 36, we saw a lot of wheat streak mosaic, even as far east as Clay County. Another topic that we saw a lot yesterday was stripe rust. So I think that out of the 15 stops that we've done, probably 12 or 13 of them had active stripe rust pustules. And those fields, they were anywhere from, out in Clay County, they were already going through early parts of grain sealing stage, kind of getting to the watery ripe stage, going more towards Bellevue and Phillipsburg. They were more around the flowering stage. And maybe as we were getting to Decatur and Raleigh County, they were more at the heading stage. So some of those growers, there's still time to spray a further fungicide, but that's going to come down to economic decision, whether there is a yield potential in that crop to justify investing on a further fungicide or not. But stripe rust was active, and stripe rust was present in essentially all of those fields, or most of those fields. And then finally, freeze damage. We saw a lot of freeze damage in those fields that we were stopping by. Nothing that was necessarily, too concerning in terms of like even thinking about abandoning a field because of that. No, not that, but, we were going to do some spikelets counting ahead. Instead of having a potential 14, 15 spikelets that would produce grain, we may have had 11 or 12. So it's something that will take a hit on our yields as well. Okay, that's the highlight of the route that I was at in Highway 36. But I also want to mention that other routes were very, very concerned with what they were seeing in terms of drought spread. And those routes were the ones that were either driving through Rooks County or south from there, like Ellis County, Rush County, Ness County, Lane. Those routes, they were reporting yields as low as 8 to 11 bushels per acre that were sampled. I would expect that these fields were probably going to be abandoned if we're having an 8 bushel per acre potential there. But we did not sample those in the route up north. We ranged from 20 to about 70 bushels per acre, averaging 49. But those routes that went, again, through Ellsworth and Hoisington and Rush and Ness and Lane, they were seeing some really rough wheat, and wheat that's probably going to be abandoned this year as well.
And Romulo, how far along is this wheat crop compared to previous years?
I would say that this year the crop is probably a good 7 to 10 days ahead of average at this point in time. I was even talking to some growers from south central Kansas. They think that if the crop maintains the pace, they're going to be harvesting first week of June, which is probably a week earlier than they would usually start. So right now we are about 7 to 10 days ahead of average. Whether that's going to stay like that or not is going to depend on the weather, right? If we have more days like yesterday and today when it's cool and moist, you might get back on average, and that would be good, right? If we're ahead of average now and we have escaped the risk of freeze damage, well, there's a chance that grain sealing may happen under slightly cooler conditions and bounce back our potential a little bit.
Is there anything you're seeing that a lot of growers are needing for their fields to hopefully improve their wheat crop, or what's done is done right now?
At this point in time, the yield potential has been set, right? So there's nothing that we can do that will increase the yield potential, but we do have an opportunity to maintain that yield potential, and what I'm seeing, again, that is still manageable in this season would come down to stripe rust. For those fields that are not at the flowering stage yet, because that's usually the cutoff for most of the fungicides, growers may still have that opportunity of going out and spraying and keeping the disease in check. So that's probably what I would suggest in terms of manageable things the growers can be thinking about at this point in time. Some growers might still be able to put out a further fungicide. Probably those growers are northwest Kansas, north central Kansas. As we go south, probably the crop is further along enough that we might not have that opportunity anymore. But stripe rust is still pretty active in north central, northwest Kansas, so that'll probably be my take home for actionable points from yesterday's trip.
As you have been on this wheat tour, what have been the feelings towards this year's crop?
I guess it's all relative, right, Shelby? So we're coming out of 3 consecutive years of very bad drought. So I think to some extent the feeling is a little bit better this year than it has been. And I'll give you the example, just the route that we are at. We averaged 49 bushels per acre. In last year, I think that we were averaging 27. And so that's a big difference there between where we are versus where we were last year. So to some of the routes, I think that the feeling was much better than we have been in the last 3 years. So that was a positive, although there are a few areas of Kansas where we have been very, very drought for a long time, and yield potential has been reduced there, again, especially in that Rush, Nass, and Ellsworth region, that central corridor.
And Romulo, where are you heading off to today on this Wednesday?
So today we leave Colby, we go south all the way to about Lakin in my route. Some routes go all the way into Johnson City or Syracuse. And then from there, the routes go east, back meeting at Wichita tonight. So the crop that we're going to see today is going to be further ahead than what we saw yesterday. Right, we're going south and west, and then moving back towards east. And I think they're going to go through some drought-stressed wheat as well, based on what I have seen before the season, especially in that region, west of Hutchinson. I think that in that southwest as well, as you go through Lakin and so on, there will be some drought-stressed crop on that region as well. So we'll see. We'll see what the numbers are going to come out in the end of the day today. But it will be a crop that is further along than where we've been. We don't think that producers will still have the opportunity to spray fungicide in that part of the state because of how far along the crop will be. But that's just some expectations that we have as of now going into the day.
As we continue with the wheat crop and going through the growing season and eventually reaching harvest, if there's a way people would like to stay up to date, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I have been reporting on this wheat tour on my Twitter account. So that's at or X, right? That's at KSU Wheat. So again, that's at KSU Wheat. And people can stay up to date there, not only with the tour, but also as we are going through different wheat plot tours and putting out reports of what we're seeing. Facebook at the same address, at KSU Wheat as well. I am active on both of those platforms, and I try to bring most updated information to growers out there.
Romulo, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us how the Hard Winter Wheat Tour is going.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate the chance to be here on air with you today.
That was K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato. You can keep up to date with what Romulo's seeing for the wheat crop by following him on Facebook and or Twitter X at KSU Wheat. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with a segment of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast, joined by Brad White, Brian Lubbers, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster.
We had a good listener question, and I think this question may be relevant to several of our other listeners. And it basically, he asked, when I introduce multiple bulls into a pasture, and whether that's the breeding pasture or a bull pasture that they're going to be going together, what's the best way to introduce them to avoid bull injuries? Bob?
Well, that's a really good question, and kind of on the theme for the day. I'm not sure I know perfect answers. A couple of things that I think about are, this is important because I've been in situations where a couple of bulls get into a fight, and you can have some real significant injury, either blow out a knee or even fracture a leg, those different types of things that can be basically devastating to a bull. And so the opportunity for bulls to fight is a real risk that needs to be considered. So then the question that the listener has is, well, how do I reduce that risk? And I wish I knew more. One part of their question was, should we introduce bulls together kind of before the cows are there so they get to know each other? I would almost lean towards introduce the bulls while the cows are there so that they have some cows to distract them, but I don't know that for certain. We think that at greater risk is young bulls housed with old bulls, so a lot of times we recommend that people kind of keep your young bulls where they are only competing with other young bulls. And so when possible. That's probably good advice. And then the other thing that probably has an impact is, well, the number of bulls. Is a bull pasture with 3 bulls, is that dynamic different than a pasture with 5 or 7 bulls? Probably so. And so my advice might even be a little bit different between, how many bulls are going to be in the breeding pasture.
Philip, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to disagree with Bob a little bit. And I think, we did talk about before we started the show that, maybe putting them with the cows at the same time could reduce the injuries. But on the other side, it just occurred to me that, well, now you're giving them something to fight over. And so it may be better off to put the bulls that are going to go in the same breeding pasture, put them together in a neutral pasture ahead of time and let them sort out that pecking order. The other thought, and I don't have any information to know which would be better or not, but maybe introducing the bulls into that neutral pasture 1 or 2 at a time. If you've got a lot of bulls that you've got to put together in the same pasture, like Bob said, maybe 5 or 7, maybe I'm going to put 3 of them in there at once and then introduce a couple new ones at a time, or putting them all in there at the same time. They have, I don't know which is better, but that's a couple of different approaches that you could try to see.
Yeah, and I agree with Phil. I think maybe the neutral pasture idea, they're going to fight, right? They're going to try to establish a pecking order. I think space is a big deal, so making sure they have plenty of space and not just like the size of the pasture total, but plenty of space around feed and water too. That's where they're going to. And the other thing I would say is you kind of got to watch out for the one at the bottom of the totem pole, right? That's the one that's probably at the highest risk for injury. So if you put them all in there, whether it's a couple at a time, all at once, I'm like the others, I don't know the right answer. But if you notice that there's one particular bull that's really getting picked on, probably need to pull him out and do something else with him.
So I think you guys have, from your responses, there's not a lot of research on this topic, right?
Yeah, there's not a lot of research about bull behavior and kind of management of that fighting. We all know it's a problem, but actually preventing that.
Well, and as Philip mentioned, it's not just bulls, right? If we introduce new cows or heifers to the herd, they'll go through the reestablishing of the pecking order. And I think one of the things that Brian said is, how about we avoid injury potential, right? In other words, you said make sure they have good footing, make sure the fences are solid, make sure we have an area that is not going to have a bunch of junk in it that somebody's going to get into or whatever, because bulls do like to tear stuff up.
The last thing is consider human safety too. I mean, these are big animals and they are not paying attention. And so I think you need to really be aware of human safety if you've got bulls fighting.
Absolutely. Just let them go. So you're not going to get in the middle of that.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.